Hi. Oh.
Hello, lovelies. Today we're going to talk about a new survey that came out on ENWorld about freelance writing rates in the RPG industry. But I've got a quick couple of things to ask of you first. I am being massively hit with demonetization for no explicable reason that I can tell. I think it might be fallout from the Indestructo Boy stuff and people. So it would be really helpful if you would share this or any other of my videos that you like recently around, like subscribe, all that jazz. And if you would toddle over to Grim Streams as well and subscribe there, that would also be hella useful. And don't forget to check the live tab on there to see all the games that we've been playing. So yeah, I would super appreciate it. Thanks. Right, so ENWorld has periodically done these surveys, by which I mean they've done them twice. Once in 2015, I believe, and the other one this year. I will put a link down below so you can go and check it out for yourself. But what they seem to have found is that the mean amount that is being paid to people for writing in the RPG industry is around 8.5 cents a word, which sounds about right to me, but it sounds about right for the top end of the RPG industry, not what most people are getting paid to write in the RPG industry. The most common single amount is 10 cents a word. That seems a lot to me based on past history. And the highest that anyone was paid was 40 cents a word, with the lowest being 1 cent a word if you were counting out, work for free stuff. Smaller companies, that is like one-man bands, which is basically how I run things, kind of. They paid out both the highest amounts and the lowest amounts. Now, I do still do some freelance writing, both inside and outside the RPG industry, and I commission work, though less commonly writing than other things within the RPG industry. So I'm on both sides of this issue, which I think gives me a useful potential perspective. Plus, I've been in the industry since 1999, before that, depending when you count being in the industry, but being paid for my work since the 90s. So I think I've got a long-term point of view on a lot of this as well. So the last time I got paid by one of the big boys was in 2010, and at a rate of 6 cents per word, with, at the time, what amounted to, I suppose, 10 to 15 years of experience, depending how you count it. And I'd worked for that publisher before. Now, that 6 cents a word was pretty much the industry top end at the time, unless you were a big name like a Monte Cook or whatever, who was a draw, a name that would bring people to a product. Then you might get more. So with inflation, that would now be around 8 cents a word, maybe a little bit more, right? So that mean value seems a little high, but not obscenely high. But that was the top end, right? So that's where the disconnect takes place. Outside of the role-playing industry, in the broader, wider writing industry world, right, an entry-level person will probably get paid 3 cents to 6 cents, which is the top in the tabletop industry, or was. Someone with intermediate experience would get 7 cents to 12 cents. Someone who is experienced might get 13 to 20 cents, and someone who is considered an expert might get 21 to 30 cents per word. Right, that's outside the RPG industry. In the RPG industry, traditionally, you would basically expect to slash that in half to give you your idea of what you might be paid in the RPG industry. And in fact, that is what their earlier but smaller survey said in 2015. And that's what my experience has been going all the way back to the year 2000, at least, where I first worked for a big guy. And nothing had really changed from 2000 through 2015. Not much at all in terms of art or writing rates for over 15 years. And now suddenly there's been this big shift, which seems kind of shocking. That relatively speaking, it seems to have been quite rapid. So from the publisher side, for a 6,000 word adventure, no stats or rules content, I do that later, I've been paying somewhere around 4 cents a word. A number that always struck me as more than generous, me being a micro publisher essentially, and given the parlous state of publishing in general, let alone a niche like role-playing games these days. I couldn't afford to pay that same rate if I was commissioning fiction, say for a collection of stories, because I know the sales in fiction just wouldn't justify it. In the role-playing industry, I know I can sell a certain amount in the fiction, especially if I was doing a collection of short stories. Short stories seem to be a hard sell these days, and there's so much more competition, especially now with AI, that it's just impossible. I don't know how Sosova does it. But so as a writer, I've written for as little as 1 cent within reasonable memory, and for as much as 6 cents. But I've generally made more money when it comes to writing for game books where people have decided to profit share, rather than doing the kind of work for hire thing. As a publisher, I hate doing profit sharing because even with the automated tools, it's a pain in the ass. Figuring out all the percentages and everything and making sure everyone gets paid. I do it, but if I do it for you, know that it's a special act of love because I hate it. Now, my suspicion is that this bigger than normal upward trend, which is 25% above inflation, is being driven by Kickstarters. But the thing about Kickstarters is that they only pay if they're successful. So there's a lot of failed projects or projects that never got off the ground that aren't being accounted for here. And the handful of projects that become massively overly successful often pay out an amount that is well over the odds for what would normally be paid in a normal business setup. Which is great and all, but it does run the risk of possibly creating unrealistic expectations, and I hesitate to use the word because it's got so many negative connotations in gaming, but creating a sense of entitlement in some writers, especially new writers who haven't yet, earned their bones. Even a bad or relatively unpopular role-playing book is likely to sell around 50 copies in reasonably fast order. If we take that 6k word count I talked about earlier, you could justify $5, maybe $6 as the cover price for the PDF, for it being something reasonable. I think much more than that would be overcharging. That would give you a budget somewhere in the region of $250. So once you paid for the writing, you'd wipe your face. You'd break even. All of that would be swallowed up by the writing. A colour cover at a fairly typical industry rate would rush you $100 to $150, maybe more because that's going up as well. And say the same again for spot illustrations inside the book. So let's call it $500 production for easy maths. At this point, you would need to sell 100 copies to break even. More than that to make any profit, probably during the long tail period. And I haven't taken into account the cut that the third-party sellers or payment transaction services are taking We also haven't paid for an editor or a layout person or, God help us, a sensitivity reader. We're assuming you do all of that yourself, right? I don't think this is sustainable. I think this means small producers are going to get horribly squeezed between boutique or virtue signaling crowdfunders on one side, making a virtue out of paying well over the odds for their writers and artists and so on, and vanity press, people producing work not for profit, not with any idea of making money, but just because they want to put a book out there and they have well-paying real jobs that will fund publishing as their hobby, right? And then on the other side, we've got the kind of zero-cost shovelware with all manner of people expecting unrealistic sums of money for their contributions in a tiny niche industry that is now apparently paying equal to or better than the wider writing industry. And I think, in part at least, that clash between professional expectation and this artificial inflated sense of entitlement, it has already happened. I think that fed into the fuss around Satine Phoenix and her fella and their company, and the community turning on her and everything. So I don't think this looks that good. It's nice that people are getting paid more as a writer, obviously. I would like to get paid more, but as a publisher, I just can't see this as being sustainable. I think this is going to push a lot of companies, smaller companies, single producers, into no longer being an ongoing concern. And that's sad. Zang. If you love my barely prepared content here, then you'll love my completely unprepared content on my streaming channel, which is youtube.com/grimstreams, which is pretty easy to remember.
Well, I look at it myself as the beginning, really, of an exploration. That's the reason we're exploring. You don't know what you'll run into on an exploration. What the sky looks like, what the stars look like. Do they still twinkle, or are they a steady light when you get outside the atmosphere?